Hello everybody and welcome back. In the last video we finished our abstract CRUDL service and we promised to move on to the user specific stuff. So we are going to create a user entity and all of the things that come together with it. But as you have seen, we added a to-do in the last video and we should get rid of it. So we should add some logging. In order to do that, we're going to use something called logger factory to get our log property, which we will use to add logs, of course. So let's type something like logger factory get logger, and to get the logger we are going to use the abstract CRUDL service class, and this will be private static final logger log. Yep. So we have a log and now we need to log an error. So as you can see here, if you type log dot, you have debug logs, you have error logs, you have trace logs, info logs, warning logs, and stuff like that. So we're going to log an error. And we need an error message, what we're going to say. So we can say something like failed to save the entity of class, and we can add a placeholder here, and then you can say entity class get class, or simple name, even better. And yeah, so we got rid of our to-do and we added some logs. And you can see here that we're also using this print stack trace, which is not nice. So we can log an error there. So we can do some error and then a.get message and pass in the exception so that you also get the stack trace. And we can make this final. Okay, so we're done here. So we got rid of all of the to-dos. We implemented everything we wanted to implement and we move on to the user. So let's go to our entity package, right click it on it and create a new class, new Java class, and let's name it user. Of course, it's a user. What else would it be? So our user class, first thing we need to do is make it an entity. So we're going to use an entity annotation. So at entity, and now the user is entity, and the entity user is going to extend the distributed entity which we created in previous tutorials. So it will inherit all of those properties that we have here, like an ID and the created and modified timestamp. Perfect. What else do we do for a user? So what will be the properties that our user will have? For example, our user may have a username. So private string username, and maybe this user will have private string name. So it's not a username, it's a name. And then we create getters and setters for these two properties. And you may know that there is an annotation called at column, which you can add, and then you can add some properties to it, like length, is it nullable and stuff like that. So we're going to make this not nullable. So the user must have a username, but he does not have a name. So let's just say it like that. This is one of our rules that we have. And since we are not changing anything about this, we are not changing its length, and we are not changing should it be nullable or not, we do not need at column annotation. So we can just leave it as it is. Perfect. Now we want to go to the DTO. We want to create a user DTO. So let's just go again. Let's name it user DTO. It will have, again, it will be extending the base DTO, and it will have two properties which we created, which is private string user name, and we want to add a name. But as you may think into the future, when we add more entities, maybe some of these will have a name also. So does it really make sense to create every property in a different DTO? Or should we maybe create something like a different DTO? Or should we add it maybe to the base DTO? Maybe you can see the problem now. If we add the name property to the base DTO, it's maybe not all of our entities will have a name. Imagine that we create an entity called user information or something, where we store the phone number of the user and I don't know, something like that, but not the name. Extending that DTO would be not so nice. So let's just create a different one and let's name it name DTO. Ah, very nice name. It will extend the base DTO, so it will have everything ID and stuff like that we created in the base DTO, but we also have a name, private string name, and let's create getters and setters for it. And then let's move back to our user DTO. We do not want to extend now the base DTO, we want to extend the name DTO. Now we have a name and we also have a username, which is something that just user specific, not every entity will have a username. And that's it. So we created our user DTO, we created our user entity. The next thing we can do is create a converter so that we are able to convert from the user entity to the user DTO. And let's name it user DTO converter. So as you may see, these classes are not abstract, so everything is nice, and this will extend the abstract DTO converter, and it's going to take now user, our entity, and user DTO, our DTO. And as you can see, we have to implement some method, which is this convert method. What do we have to do here? We are expecting here to convert the entity into user DTO. So how do we do that? We go final, we create some user DTO, which is empty in this case. So this will be DTO, and this is something that we are returning. So as you may have remember, when are we calling this method? For example, in the abstract CRUDL service, we are calling it in the get by ID. Here. So we didn't implement this get by ID. So let's just do it really fast. We forgot about it. Oh no. So how do we fetch something by the ID from the database? We actually did it before. So we can go repository, find by ID. We pass in the ID that we want. We introduce okay, maybe we don't do it like that. We go or else null, and we have an entity. Final. If our entity is null, return null, and of course log an error. Failed to find entity with ID, and add an ID here. And then what do we return here? We return the same as we did before, converter, convert, and our entity. So with this, we are returning the converted entity. So we need to do exactly the same. So as you can see, this convert method is called here when we are trying to convert our entity. So we do not have a DTO. That's why we are creating an empty one, and then we are mapping all of the properties from the entity to the DTO. So if we go back to the user converter, this is the method that we are going to call there in the case of a user. So creating an empty DTO is perfectly valid. And now we need to convert it. So we could do something like DTO set ID and then entity get ID. This would work, but then we would have to repeat this process for every entity. Or since we are extending the abstract DTO converter, we can do something like super, which goes between this is the super class, convert, and we pass in the entity and we pass in the DTO. So what is converted here? DTO, we are setting the ID, we are setting the created timestamp, and we are setting the modified timestamp. And we can now do something DTO set name. So entity get name, DTO set username, entity get username. So these are some properties, user specific properties. And we need to do one more thing. We need to use a Spring annotation to make sure that this can be injected. So the Spring has this dependency injection so that we can actually use this. We annotate it with a component. So this is a Spring Framework annotation which says, okay, yeah, this is a component, and then Spring does its magic to be able to find it. So we are going to wrap it for this video. In the next one, we are going to add a user service, and we are going to use add a user API and a user controller and an abstract controller. So I'll see you guys in the next video.